starving man, a desperate woman, and a bond forged in the crucible of survival, a story etched into the unforgiving landscape of the American frontier, where compassion defied convention and fate spun a most improbable tapestry. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments where are you watching from, and subscribe if you want more content like this one. The wind, a relentless sculptor of the high plains, whistled its ancient song through the parched grasses, carrying with it the ghost of 1,000 seasons. Ayanna, her face a roadmap of resilience and sorrow, pulled the threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, the biting chill seeping into her very bones. 7 small shadows, her children, huddled close, their eyes wide with the perpetual hunger that gnawed at their bellies. The winter had descended with a cruel swiftness, stripping the land bare, leaving behind only the stark promise of famine. Every morning was a gamble, every sunset a fragile victory. Their teepee, a fragile haven against the indifferent vastness, seemed to shrink with each passing day, the warmth of their dwindling fire offering little comfort against the encroaching cold. Their people, the Numanu, the Comanche, had endured much, but this winter felt different, heavier, laden with an almost insurmountable despair. She remembered her husband, the fierce warrior, his laugh echoing across these same plains, now silenced forever, swallowed by an illness that spared no one. His absence was a phantom limb, a constant ache. Yet she had 7 reasons to rise, 7 pairs of eyes that looked to her, 7 small hearts that beat with a tenacious hope. It was this hope, this fierce maternal instinct, that drove her out into the unforgiving expanse each day, searching for anything at all that might sustain them. Today, the search led her further than usual, past the familiar hunting grounds, into territory where the shadows of the white man's settlements began to stretch, a boundary often crossed with a heavy heart and a wary eye. The air thrummed with a low, almost imperceptible tension, a feeling that something was amiss, a deviation from the harsh but predictable rhythm of nature. Ayanna moved with the quiet grace of a predator, her senses alert, her spirit an extension of the wild around her. Her gaze, sharpened by necessity, scanned the horizon, seeking movement, a sign, a whisper of life. And then she saw it. Not a deer, not a rabbit, but a shape, still and unnatural, slumped against a gnarled cottonwood tree. A man, a white man. A chill, colder than the wind, traced its way down her spine. He lay there, a pale, gaunt figure against the muted earth, his breath a shallow, struggling whisper. Elias Thorne, a man accustomed to the sterile comfort of a judge's bench, found himself reduced to a mere husk, every muscle screaming in protest. His throat a desert. He had ridden west with the zealous conviction of civilization's advance, only to be struck down by a fever that left him delirious, abandoned by his cowardly escort. Now, the relentless frontier, which he had once viewed as a canvas for order and law, became his merciless executioner. His fine clothes, once crisp and authoritative, were now tattered rags, stained with mud and the remnants of his failing dignity. Ayanna approached him with a cautious tread, her hand instinctively resting on the bone-handled knife tucked into her belt. Her mind raced, a complex tapestry of caution and an unexpected surge of pity. This was a man of the settlers, the people who encroached, who brought new diseases and strange customs, who spoke of land ownership with a possessiveness that defied the very spirit of the earth. Yet looking at him, stripped bare of all his societal accoutrements, he was simply a dying creature. His chest barely rose and fell, his skin was stretched taut over prominent bones, his lips cracked and bleeding. He was not a threat, not anymore. He was merely an echo of life fading fast. Her children, who had been trailing silently behind her, now peered from behind her legs, their small faces a mixture of fear and bewildered curiosity. Their gazes, unburdened by the complexities of adult prejudice, were simply fixed on the suffering form before them. The raw, primal instinct to preserve life, a lesson taught by the harsh mistress of the plains, warred with the deep-seated mistrust ingrained by generations of conflict. Her people had suffered much at the hands of men like him, but a dying man, especially one so helpless, invoked a different kind of ancient law, one of shared humanity beneath the vast, indifferent sky. She knelt, her movements fluid and deliberate, observing him closer. His eyes, though barely open, held a flicker of something, a desperate plea perhaps, or simply the last vestiges of a fading consciousness. The moral tightrope she walked was perilous. Saving him could bring trouble, but abandoning him felt like a deeper betrayal, not of his kind, but of her own spirit, of the very essence of what it meant to be Numunu. The decision, when it came, was not born of logic or calculation, but of an instinct as old as the plains themselves. Ayanna, with a quiet resolve that belied the immense burden she carried, began the arduous task of moving the man. He was surprisingly heavy, a dead weight of human frailty. Her children, though small, instinctively understood the gravity of the situation and, without a word, began to gather dry branches, their small hands working diligently to aid their mother. It was a silent testament to their unity, their survival etched into every shared effort. She stripped away his fine, wet coat, revealing the extent of his emaciation, his ribs starkly visible beneath his pale skin. There was no judgment in her touch, only the practiced efficiency of one who understood the fragility of life. She used her own buffalo hide blanket, wrapping him carefully, trying to coax some warmth back into his shivering form. The journey back to their teepee was slow, a painstaking crawl across the frozen ground. Each step was a battle against the elements and against the sheer weight of their unexpected burden. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, his fevered mind painting distorted landscapes of his past life, of courtrooms and judgments, of a world so distant it felt like a dream. When they finally reached the teepee, a small, welcome plume of smoke rising from its peak, Ayanna immediately set about preparing a thin broth from the last scraps of dried meat and roots. It was a meager offering, but it was all they had. She spoon-fed him, her touch gentle but firm, forcing the liquid down his resistant throat. His body, starved for sustenance, convulsed violently at first, then slowly, reluctantly, began to accept the warmth. The children watched, their large, solemn eyes fixed on the stranger. They had never seen a white man so close, so helpless. Their mother's unwavering resolve was a silent lesson, teaching them compassion in the face of ingrained fear. The days that followed blurred into a rhythmic cycle of care and watchfulness. Ayanna tended to him with a quiet dedication, changing his makeshift bandages, brewing herbal teas for his fever, and sharing their precious, dwindling rations. She spoke little, her focus unwavering. There was no expectation of gratitude, no grand pronouncement of mercy. There was only the stark reality of survival, shared between a desperate woman, her hungry children, and a dying man. It was an act of profound, almost reckless humanity in a world that often demanded cruelty. As the days bled into weeks, Elias's fever slowly receded, leaving him weak but lucid. The initial delirium gave way to a stark awareness of his surroundings, of the small, smoky teepee, and of the silent, watchful family who had become his unlikely saviors. He saw Ayanna, her face often shadowed by the firelight, moving with a quiet strength that both awed and shamed him. He saw the children, their eyes mirroring the hunger he himself had felt, yet never complaining, always respectful of their mother's quiet authority. He saw the stark evidence of their poverty, the worn blankets, the scarcity of food, and the profound generosity with which they had shared their meager provisions. This was not how he had imagined the savages of the plains. His ingrained prejudices, nurtured by a lifetime of societal conditioning, and the narratives of the expanding frontier, began to crumble, brick by painful brick. He, Judge Elias Thorne, a man of law and order, a pillar of his community, had always viewed the Comanche as little more than obstacles to progress, untamed wildness to be subdued. Now he was utterly dependent on their very essence, on the quiet dignity and unwavering compassion of a woman he would have, in his previous life, dismissed without a second thought. The irony was a bitter draught. He, who had judged so many, was now judged by the silent, discerning eyes of children, and the unwavering gaze of a woman who had saved him from a fate worse than any prison. His throat, still raw, often swelled with unspoken questions, with gratitude that felt too monumental to articulate. He tried once a raspy whisper of thanks, but Ayanna merely nodded, her expression unreadable, as if his words were unnecessary, understood without utterance. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken histories, with the weight of cultural chasms. Yet it was also strangely comforting, a space where understanding slowly began to take root, nurtured by shared vulnerability. He watched her mend a torn moccasin, her fingers deft and precise, a stark contrast to his own clumsy, weakened hands. He observed the way she comforted a whimpering child, the low, melodious tones of her language a lullaby even to his uncomprehending ears. Each small observation chipped away at the edifice of his former beliefs, revealing not a savage, but a woman of extraordinary strength, resilience, and an almost sacred compassion. The world outside the teepee remained a frozen, unforgiving expanse, but within its buffalo hide walls, something fundamental was shifting, transforming the rigid landscape of Elias Thorne's very soul. As Elias slowly regained strength, the harsh realities of their existence became even more starkly apparent. The children, though resilient, were growing thinner, their laughter less frequent, replaced by the hushed whispers of hunger. Ayana's face, already etched with worry, seemed to deepen with each passing day. The buffalo, their lifeblood, were scarce, driven away by the encroaching settlements and the relentless winter. The scarcity was a constant, gnawing presence, a silent clock ticking towards an unknown but ominous deadline. Elias, despite his weakness, began to feel the heavy burden of his presence. He was another mouth to feed, another drain on their precious, dwindling resources. The shame was a searing heat in his chest, a stark contrast to the icy plains outside. He, who had always commanded, always taken, was now a receiver, a burden. He tried to help, to gather firewood, but his movements were still clumsy, his body protesting every effort. Ayana would simply watch him, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before gently, wordlessly, taking the task from him. Her silence was not judgment, but it spoke volumes of her strength and his lingering weakness. The arrival of a lone, older Comanche warrior, a scout named Kicking Bear, brought a ripple of tension to their quiet haven. Kicking Bear regarded Elias with a gaze that was both wary and fiercely protective, his hand never far from the knife at his hip. He spoke to Ayana in rapid, guttural tones, his voice low and urgent. Elias understood nothing of their words, but the gravity of their exchange was palpable. He sensed the unspoken questions, the subtle disapproval, the danger his presence represented to Ayana and her children. He was an outsider, a white man in a world already fraught with peril, a potential beacon for trouble. Ayana, however, stood her ground, her voice a soft but unyielding counterpoint to Kicking Bear's impassioned pleas. Elias understood then that she was defending him, asserting her decision, even against the counsel of her own people. It was an act of profound courage, a defiance of communal caution born of a deeply personal commitment. The old warrior eventually left, his parting glance at Elias a mixture of resignation and lingering suspicion. The incident underscored the fragility of their arrangement, the precarious balance Ayana maintained between her own people and the life she had chosen to save. Elias, witnessing this quiet struggle, felt a new wave of respect for her, a recognition of the fierce spirit that resided beneath her stoic exterior. He realized with a sudden, jarring clarity that her compassion was not a weakness, but a formidable strength. One frigid afternoon, while Ayana was preparing a meager meal, a small piece of dried venison, the aroma barely clinging to the cold air, Elias found himself watching her, truly seeing her for the first time. Her movements were economic, every gesture imbued with purpose. There was a faint scar tracing her left cheekbone, a story he could not decipher. Her hands, though calloused from years of hard labor, moved with a surprising tenderness as she portioned the meat, ensuring each child received an equal, albeit tiny, share. He noticed the weary slump of her shoulders when she thought no one was looking, the profound exhaustion that seemed to settle upon her like a cloak. And then, without preamble, she spoke, her voice low, almost a whisper against the crackle of the fire. He was a good man, my husband. Strong. A hunter. He taught our sons to track, to ride. Her gaze was fixed on the flickering flames, but her eyes held a distant, sorrowful light. The fever took him, took many, left me with these children, left us with nothing but our spirit. The words hung in the air, spare yet devastating. each syllable heavy with unspoken grief and the crushing weight of her responsibility. Elias felt a profound tremor run through him. This was not a complaint, not a plea for pity. It was a statement of stark, undeniable fact, delivered with the quiet dignity of one who had faced the abyss and returned, scarred, but unbroken. He had seen loss, certainly, in his courtroom, in the grim faces of those who sought justice, but it had always been through a pane of glass filtered by legal rhetoric and professional detachment. This was raw, immediate, profoundly human. He thought of his own life, of the comforts he had known, the easy assumptions he had made about wealth and status. He remembered his own family, his distant, exacting father, his frail, easily disheartened mother. He had never truly known such profound, self-sacrificing love, or such a crushing burden of responsibility. The contrast between their worlds, between his life of privileged decisions and her life of agonizing choices, was a chasm. He recognized in that moment the true extent of her sacrifice, not just in saving his life, but in simply continuing to live, to provide, to protect her children against an indifferent and often cruel world. Her words, few as they were, painted a vivid, haunting picture of her widowhood, of the relentless struggle that had defined her existence long before he stumbled into it. He was not just a recipient of her mercy. He was a witness to her enduring pain, a silent observer of a strength forged in the fires of loss. As winter's iron grip began to loosen, giving way to the first tentative whispers of spring, Elias felt a restless energy stir within him. His body, though still bearing the marks of his ordeal, was steadily mending, the strength returning to his limbs with each passing day. The long, silent hours within the teepee, spent observing Ayanna and her children, had altered him in ways he could barely articulate. The world he had known, the world of legal precedents and societal strictures, now seemed distant, almost illusory. This harsh, vital landscape and the quiet, profound humanity he had witnessed within it had reshaped his understanding of existence itself. Yet, the inevitability of his departure loomed. He was a white man. His place was not here, not with them. The thought, once a source of relief, now carried an unexpected ache. He was no longer the arrogant judge, confident in his own superiority. He was a man humbled, indebted, and strangely adrift. He tried to speak of his gratitude, of the debt he owed her, but the words felt hollow, insufficient against the magnitude of her gift. Ayanna, sensing his readiness, his growing restlessness, offered no objection. Her gaze, as always, was calm, accepting. She simply prepared a small pouch of dried berries and roots, a final offering from their scarce provisions, and handed it to him. Her silence was a profound communication, a recognition of their different paths, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had formed, fragile yet undeniable. The farewell was brief, devoid of fanfare. He stood outside the teepee, the morning light painting the plains in hues of pale gold. The children peered from the entrance, their small faces solemn. He met Ayanna's eyes one last time, a fleeting moment where unspoken volumes passed between them, gratitude, understanding, and perhaps a flicker of something akin to sorrow. Then, with a nod, he turned and walked away, his steps initially tentative, then gaining purpose, heading east towards the distant whispers of his own world. The vast plains swallowed him whole, leaving Ayanna and her children alone once more, the faint scent of smoke and the lingering echo of a stranger's presence slowly dissipating into the immense silence. Ayanna watched until his figure was no more than a speck on the horizon, then turned, the weight of their solitary survival settling back upon her shoulders. The spring promised new life, but it also brought the familiar, relentless struggle. The open loop of Elias's departure left a subtle void, an unfamiliar quiet in their small world, a testament to the unexpected ripple he had created in the quiet stream of their lives. Months bled into the warmth of summer, then cooled into the crisp, gold-tinged days of autumn. Ayanna and her children had endured as they always did. The hunts had been more fruitful, the wild berries sweet on their tongues. Yet a subtle shift had occurred within Ayanna. The silence that had once felt natural now carried a faint echo, a lingering memory of the man who had briefly shared their hearth. She never spoke of him, not to her children, not to the few passing Comanche who occasionally visited. But he was there, a ghost in the periphery of her thoughts, a testament to the strange, unexpected turns life could take. Elias, meanwhile, had found his way back to the semblance of his former life. The journey east had been a slow, arduous process of physical and emotional recovery. He had returned to his duties, to the familiar rhythm of courtrooms and legal arguments. But the world felt different, dulled, somehow less real. The polite society, the intricate dances of power and status, the very foundation of his identity, now seemed flimsy, almost absurd, compared to the stark, undeniable truths he had learned on the plains. The taste of a fine meal, the warmth of a soft bed felt undeserved, haunted by the memory of Ayana's sacrifices. He tried to reconcile the Elias Thorne who had left on that ill-fated journey with the man who had returned, but the two felt like strangers. The hunger he had known, the fear, the absolute dependence on the kindness of a woman he had been taught to despise. These experiences had burned away the layers of his arrogance and prejudice, leaving behind a raw, exposed vulnerability. He tried to forget, to immerse himself in his work, but the image of Ayana's quiet strength, the solemn eyes of her children, the chill of that teepee, haunted his waking hours and infiltrated his dreams. The injustice of their poverty, the stark beauty of their resilience gnawed at him. He saw the world through new eyes, eyes that recognized the vast inequalities and the quiet heroism that existed beyond the confines of his privileged existence. The comfortable numbness of his former life was gone, replaced by a restless disquiet, a profound sense of unfinished business. He wrestled with his conscience, with the expectations of his position, with the societal chasm that separated him from the woman who had given him back his life. The very thought was scandalous, unthinkable in his world, yet it pulsed within him, a silent, insistent drumbeat. The open loop of his return to civilization had not closed anything. It had merely highlighted a deeper, more profound, unresolved question that only the vast, indifferent plains could answer. The first frost had dusted the plains in a delicate, shimmering white when Ayana first saw him again. He emerged from the stark horizon like a phantom, a solitary rider, his silhouette against the pale sky impossibly familiar. Her breath caught in her throat, a knot of surprise and an inexplicable flutter of something she couldn't name. He was on a strong horse, well fed, and his clothes, though still practical for the trail, were clean, a clear indication of a journey from a world of comfort. He dismounted slowly, his gaze sweeping the familiar landscape, then settling on her. He had changed, profoundly so. The gauntness was gone, replaced by a quiet strength, a depth in his eyes that had not been there before. The arrogance, the crisp authority of the judge had melted away, leaving behind a man softened by experience, refined by humility. He walked towards her, his steps deliberate, each one a testament to the courage it must have taken for him to return. The children, sensing the unusual atmosphere, gathered around Ayana, their small hands clutching her skirt, their eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and fascination. Ayana waited, her face impassive, masking the whirlwind of emotions that churned within her. Why had he returned? The question hung heavy in the crisp autumn air, unasked but palpable. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hands clasped loosely before him. There was no grand declaration, no theatrical pronouncement. The silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of their shared history, with the unspoken bond forged in the crucible of his near death. Elias looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing not just the Comanche woman who had saved him, but the fierce, resilient spirit, the devoted mother, the profound humanity that transcended all boundaries. He saw the subtle lines of worry around her eyes, the strength in her jaw, the quiet dignity that radiated from her being. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to catch, inadequate to express the tumultuous journey that had brought him back to this desolate yet profoundly sacred place. The mystery of his return was not in the mere act of it, but in the transformation it signified, a testament to a truth that had taken root in his very soul, a truth that defied all reason and societal convention. He finally spoke, his voice low, a timbre softened by the vast silences he had journeyed through. "Ayana," he began, her name a foreign yet oddly gentle sound on his tongue. I have carried your kindness with me. It has been a burden and a salvation." He paused, searching for the right words, words that could bridge the chasm of language and culture, words that could convey the profound shift within his soul. "I have returned to my world, to my life, but it no longer fits. It feels empty. I have seen the true measure of courage, of generosity, of what it means to be truly alive here with you." His gaze held hers, unwavering, vulnerable. "I have thought long and hard. My life, my very existence, I owe to you and your children. What I offer now, it is not payment. It is a recognition, a hope." He took a deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs, steeling his resolve. "I am Elias Thorne, and I have come to ask you, Ayanna, if you will be my wife. To ask if your children will become my family." The words, stark in their simplicity, hung in the air, echoing across the vast plains, an audacious, almost unbelievable proposition. Ayanna's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of profound shock breaking through her stoic composure. The children, sensing the seismic shift in the air, drew even closer, their small bodies tensed. This was not the expected gratitude, not the promised supplies, but something far more monumental, more challenging, more dangerous. A Comanche widow, mother of 7, marrying a white judge? The very notion defied every societal norm, every unspoken law of their separate worlds. It was a scandal waiting to happen, a union that would be met with outrage from his people, suspicion from hers. The implications were staggering, a lifetime of navigating prejudice, misunderstanding, and the relentless judgment of a world that refused to bend. Her mind reeled, a torrent of questions, fears, and a strange, nascent hope. Was this genuine? Was this the measure of his transformation? Or merely a fleeting impulse born of desperation and gratitude? The dramatic climax had arrived, not in a clash of arms, but in a quiet, profoundly personal proposal that promised to shatter the boundaries of two disparate worlds. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the whispers of the wind, as Ayanna stared at the man who had been a dying stranger, and now offered her a life she could never have imagined. The silence stretched, taut and charged, as Elias's audacious proposal hung in the cool autumn air. Ayanna's mind, usually clear and decisive, felt a tumultuous whirlwind of emotions. Fear mingled with an almost reckless curiosity. Her people, steeped in tradition, would view this union with a mixture of suspicion and pity. His people, rigid in their societal structures, would see it as an unthinkable affront, a crossing of lines that were never meant to be breached. She envisioned the whispers, the pointed fingers, the quiet ostracization from both sides. Yet when she looked at Elias, she saw not the judge, not the man of a different race, but the man whose life she had saved, the man humbled by the vastness of the plains and the simple, undeniable truth of compassion. She saw the genuine plea in his eyes, a depth of feeling that transcended the social conventions he was defying. He was offering her not just a name, but a sanctuary from the relentless struggle, a partnership in a world that had left her to bear the weight alone. More than that, he was offering her children a future, a possibility of sustenance and security that she, in her widowhood, could barely dream of providing. It was a choice between the familiar, albeit crushing burden of her solitary existence and the terrifying, unpredictable embrace of a new, unconventional path. The weight of her children's future pressed upon her. They deserved more than endless hunger and the constant threat of an unforgiving world. She looked at their small faces, their eyes wide and expectant, reflecting her own uncertainty. This was not a decision of love, not in the way her people understood it, not yet. It was a decision of survival, of a desperate hope for a better life forged from an improbable connection. The hope, tenuous yet persistent, began to outweigh the fear. She remembered the fierce, protective light in his eyes when Kicking Bear had been wary of him. She remembered the quiet respect in his gaze when she spoke of her husband. He had seen her, truly seen her, beyond the veneer of her Comanche identity, beyond the prejudices of his world. And in that recognition there was a profound promise. Ayanna finally broke the silence, her voice soft, barely audible above the rustling grass, yet imbued with a quiet power that resonated in the vast openness. "It would not be easy," she stated, her gaze sweeping across the plains, then returning to his expectant face. "Your world, it is not my world, and my world, it will not understand." It was not a question, but a statement of undeniable fact, a challenge thrown into the face of his extraordinary proposal. Elias nodded slowly, his expression solemn. "I know," he affirmed, his voice resolute. "It will be hard, but I have faced death, Ayanna. And what I found through your kindness, it is worth fighting for, worth defying for." His words, simple yet profoundly honest, spoke of a transformation far deeper than mere physical recovery. He was no longer the man who had ridden into the plains with arrogance and preconceived notions. He was a man remade, stripped of his biases, open to a truth that transcended the rigid boundaries of his society. Ayanna looked at her children, then back at Elias, a long, assessing gaze that weighed the precarious hope against the daunting uncertainty. The decision was not just hers, but theirs. She had always fought for them, and this perhaps was the greatest fight yet, the fight for a future that defied the shadows of their past. She lifted her chin, a flicker of her warrior spirit shining in her eyes. "Then we will fight," she said, her voice a low, firm whisper, a promise whispered to the wind and to the man who stood before her. The journey ahead was unknown, fraught with challenges that would test the very fabric of their unlikely union. Yet, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, a new chapter unfurled on the vast, indifferent plains. A Comanche widow, scarred by loss yet unbowed by hardship, and a white judge, humbled by grace and transformed by compassion, stood on the precipice of a future no one could have foreseen. Their bond, forged in the crucible of survival, was a fragile seedling, vulnerable yet tenacious, destined to grow against the relentless winds of prejudice and convention. It was a testament to the enduring power of humanity, a quiet defiance whispered against the backdrop of an unforgiving world, holding the tentative, hopeful promise of a life woven from courage, resilience, and an improbable, yet undeniable connection.